Mother-in-law spiked my drink at family dinner. I swapped glasses with her husband, and then my stomach tightened the moment Diane cornered me in the kitchen. The way her eyes darted nervously around the room before she handed me that drink made my instinct scream that something was off. There was a slight tremor in her fingers as she said, "I made it special, just for you." Something wasn't right. I didn't yet know how wrong it was about to get. Haley and I had met 6 years ago at an art exhibition where my work was being showcased. She was finishing her master's in environmental science, and I was just starting to make a name for myself in the art world. From the moment we met, we clicked. She understood my need to capture the world through a lens, and I admired her unwavering passion for protecting it. Her parents, however, were a different story. From the first meeting, Gerald made it painfully clear that he had expected someone different for his daughter. Someone with a desk job, a retirement plan, a company car, someone who was essentially a mirror of himself. Diane was more subtle in her disapproval. She would praise my photography while casually asking when I planned to settle down into something more stable. She'd invite me to family gatherings, only to introduce me as the photographer rather than as her future son-in-law. For years, I felt the weight of their judgment, a quiet pressure that lingered just beneath the surface of every family interaction that I tried everything to win them over. I brought expensive wine to dinners, showcased my published work, and casually mentioned high-profile clients. Nothing changed. In their eyes, I was just a temporary presence in their daughter's life, a phase Haley would eventually outgrow. Last Christmas, I overheard Diane on the phone. Haley could have married Thomas, the orthopedic surgeon. Family money. But she chose the creative one. The way she emphasized creative made it sound like a disease. Gerald was more blunt. When Haley and I announced we were trying for a baby, he pulled me aside. "Children are expensive, son. Maybe think about real employment before bringing one into the world." I never told Haley about these moments. She loved her parents despite their flaws, and I didn't want to force her into choosing sides. So I smiled, shook Gerald's hand firmly at every visit, complimented Diane's cooking, and kept my thoughts to myself. Still, there were warning signs I should have paid more attention to. The way Diane would call Haley to help in the kitchen whenever I spoke about a successful project. How she accidentally excluded me from family photos. The time Gerald suggested therapy for Haley's impulsive decisions, a comment that carried an unspoken judgment toward me as well. Each incident was small on its own, almost dismissible, but together they painted a picture of quiet manipulation, a web I was only beginning to understand that I looked directly at them, tried to ignore the subtle slights and passive judgments, convincing myself that, over time, they'd accept me. I was wrong. It was the Friday of Diane's birthday dinner. I had just returned from Montana, cheeks raw from the biting wind, and a memory card in my pocket full of photographs that would cover our mortgage for 3 months. I was bone-tired, but after a quick shower and a change into a crisp button-down shirt, I drove Haley and myself to her parents' colonial-style home in the most expensive part of town. Dinner began normally. Gerald, as always, dominated the conversation, bragging about a recent deal he had closed. Diane fussed over the table settings with her signature meticulousness, ensuring every fork, napkin, and wine glass was perfectly aligned. Haley's brother Owen and his wife Vanessa made polite conversation, smiles plastered on their faces, but just shy of genuine warmth. I nursed a beer, quietly counting the minutes until we could leave, mentally cataloging each subtle dig, each sideways glance, each word that made it clear I was never quite enough. After the main course, Diane announced she had prepared her famous sangria for dessert. The announcement was casual, but there was a glint in her eyes, a certain pride in presenting something special, as if to assert her control over the evening and, by extension, over me. I forced a polite smile, but a knot tightened in my stomach. Something about the way she handed me the glass, the slight tremor in her fingers, made my instincts flare. I took a careful sip, pretending ignorance while a quiet unease began to settle over me. The rest of the evening passed with strained conversation, polite laughter, and the faint hum of tension that only I seemed to notice. I kept my focus on Haley, grateful for her presence and warmth, even as the undercurrent of something darker began to make itself known. Every glance, every movement, every word from Diane and Gerald felt like a small test, one I had failed repeatedly in their eyes. And yet, despite all the warning signs, I convinced myself that time and patience would eventually earn their acceptance. I didn't yet realize how dangerously wrong I was. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I offered to help carry the glasses. That's when I saw it. 2 glasses had been set aside, separate from the rest. As I stepped closer, I noticed her quickly adding something from a small vial into one of them. It wasn't a garnish or a flavoring. It was colorless, odorless, and deliberate. She tucked the vial away the moment she heard my footsteps. "Oh, Julian, I've got this," she said too brightly, her smile sharp with false cheer. "This one's for you. My special recipe for my favorite son-in-law." My throat tightened. The glass had a faint, almost imperceptible film floating on the surface, catching the light in a way that made my stomach twist. "Let me help you carry these," I said, taking both glasses in my hands and moving them into the dining room. Gerald was slouched in his chair, checking his phone, barely glancing up as I approached. "Sangria, sir," I said, placing the tampered glass in front of him. I made a casual excuse about preferring water with my dessert and set my own untouched glass aside. I watched Gerald lift the glass and take a sip. 45 minutes later, Gerald was pale, sweating, and bolting toward the bathroom. The violent sounds of his illness echoed through the house, a horrifying confirmation of what I had suspected. Diane hovered nearby, pretending concern, while I remained in the dining room, heart-pounding, stunned at what had just unfolded. I realized, in that moment, how far Diane was willing to go and how close I had come to being caught in something truly dangerous. Every polite dinner, every forced compliment over the years, every subtle exclusion suddenly made sense. The web of control, manipulation, and malice had been there all along. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't safe, not in that house, not around that family, not even at what had seemed like a simple birthday dinner that I stepped back, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced, piecing together the danger I had only glimpsed before. Diane's behavior, subtle for years, had escalated into something deliberate, calculated. This wasn't just control, it was malicious. I glanced toward Haley, who was busy helping Diane clean up the kitchen. She had no idea what was happening, no clue that her mother's special recipes could have turned deadly. I had to protect her, and more importantly, I had to protect myself. Diane returned to the dining room, her smile perfectly composed. "Everything okay, Julian?" she asked, the cheerfulness in her voice almost mechanical. "Fine," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Just helping Gerald with his sangria experience." I forced a chuckle, hoping it sounded casual, masking the panic simmering inside. But Diane didn't falter. She simply raised an eyebrow, as if silently challenging me to call her bluff. I realized then that she knew exactly how far she could push, and she was daring me to react. I moved carefully, setting my own glass firmly out of reach, making sure Haley couldn't accidentally pick it up. Every muscle in my body was tense, every sense heightened. The warm, familiar house suddenly felt like a trap, the polished floors and ornate furniture masking a dark intent. Gerald finally emerged, shaky and pale, mumbling apologies for overindulging. Diane hovered, concerned in appearance only, eyes flicking to me with a subtle, unreadable expression. I forced a polite smile, but inside, I knew the moment had changed everything. I needed a plan. I couldn't confront Diane here, not with Haley in the room, not while Gerald was weak and disoriented. I had to think several moves ahead, just like I had learned to do with my photography and my projects. That night, after driving Haley home, I stayed awake, replaying the scene in my mind. Every gesture, every word, every subtle manipulation Diane had used over the years clicked into place. She was dangerous, and I was dealing with someone who would stop at nothing to assert control over her family. The quiet hum of the city outside my apartment contrasted sharply with the storm inside me. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't underestimate her again. Not for a second. The moment Diane's face drained of color, I knew. Her eyes locked with mine across the table, And in that instant, two truths became crystal clear. My mother-in-law had tried to poison me, and she knew that I knew. I didn't react. I didn't confront her. I simply continued eating my chocolate cake, masking my shock and fury, while Haley rushed to check on her father. Gerald, pale and sweating, insisted it must have been food poisoning. Diane stammered about bad shellfish and offered forced apologies. In the chaos, I quietly pocketed the untouched glass that had been intended for me. Something inside me had shifted. The anger I felt wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold, precise, and deliberate. I realized I wasn't going to let this go, but I wouldn't fight their way either. I would make them face the truth about exactly who they were. On Monday, I brought the glass to Jason, a former client who ran a toxicology lab. He had handled everything from personal to professional inquiries and was meticulous in his work. When he asked what I needed, I kept it simple. "It's a family matter," I said. 3 days later, Jason called. "Julian, there were benzodiazepines in that drink. Nothing lethal, but enough to knock someone out for hours, or potentially cause memory loss." "Where did you get this?" he asked. I thanked him and requested a written report, choosing not to answer his question. That night, I told Haley I wanted to skip Sunday dinner for a while, claiming I needed to focus on an upcoming exhibition. She was disappointed, but understanding. I didn't tell her about the test results. Not yet. I needed more information first. Over the next 2 weeks, I began digging. Diane had prescriptions for Xanax from 3 different doctors, and she had been doubling and tripling her doses for years. I uncovered rumors around town. Strange behavior at a neighbor's party, whispered accusations of stolen jewelry at her country club, stories her family had desperately tried to bury. I compiled everything meticulously, documents, witness accounts, pharmacy records, even old articles from social circles, and waited for my moment. And then, finally, it came. When Haley mentioned that her mother needed photos for a new social media profile, she specifically asked if I would take them. Haley looked surprised at the request, but I agreed. The following Saturday, I arrived at their house alone. Camera bag slung over one shoulder, a sealed envelope clutched in my other hand. Diane was waiting, immaculately dressed, makeup flawless, radiating the kind of controlled elegance she always carried. Gerald was at the office. Before we began, I spoke quietly, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "I thought you might want to see this." I handed her the envelope. Inside was the toxicology report, along with printouts of her multiple prescriptions, meticulously compiled. Her hands trembled as she read. "This is absurd," she whispered, her voice tight. "I would never." We both knew what had happened. I cut her off. "Well, I don't understand," I said, my tone calm, deliberate is why. Her face hardened. "You're not good enough for my daughter. You never will be. A man should provide security, not pictures. And drugging your daughter's husband, that provides security." I kept my voice steady, letting the words land. "It wasn't going to hurt you," she snapped back. "It was just to make you sick, to make you miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been talking about for months. To show Haley that you're unreliable." I let that sink in, letting the weight of her confession hang in the air. This was who she truly was, exposed for the first time. "Here's what happens next," I said, finally breaking the silence. "You're going to tell Gerald what you did. Then, you're both going to start treating me with respect. Not because you've suddenly changed your minds about me, but because the alternative is far worse." Her eyes flickered with panic, a flicker of the control she had wielded for years slipping through her perfect composure. For the first time, I held the power in this family dynamic. It wasn't about revenge in the impulsive sense. It was about making them face the truth of who they were and making sure I would never be at their mercy again. Diane didn't respond immediately. She was calculating, weighing options, realizing that for the first time, her carefully constructed world was no longer hers to control. And I knew, in that moment, that everything had shifted. The balance of power, the unspoken rules of their household, even Haley's perception of her mother. All of it was about to change. Was Haley about to finally see her parents for who they really were? Diane laughed, but the sound was hollow, brittle. "She'll never believe you over us," she sneered. I picked up my camera bag. "Maybe not," I said calmly, but she will believe the lab report, the prescription records, and the neighbors you've alienated. Are you really willing to bet your relationship with your daughter on that? I left without taking a single photo that night. Diane, furious and desperate, called Haley in tears, claiming I behaved inappropriately during our session, insisting I'd been hostile and threatening. When Haley confronted me the next day, I couldn't hide the truth any longer. I showed her everything, the lab report, the prescription records, even the text messages from her mother that had grown increasingly hostile over the years. My mother wouldn't do this, Haley kept repeating, her voice trembling, but the words lacked conviction. I could see the doubt creeping in, the confusion, the realization that what she had always believed about her parents wasn't the whole story. The next day, Haley confronted her parents. I stayed back, giving her the space to face them, to grapple with the truth herself. Diane and Gerald tried their usual manipulations, attempting charm, denial, and intimidation, but Haley had the evidence in her hands. Every text, every record, every corroborating witness she had now laid bare the reality of their actions. For the first time, Haley saw them as they truly were. Not the protective, polished figure she had grown up believing in, but people capable of calculated manipulation, deception, and cruelty. And in that moment, she began to reclaim her autonomy, her trust in herself, and her power to define the boundaries of her life. If you want, I can continue the story from here, showing the confrontation between Haley and her parents, Diane and Gerald's reactions, and how the narrator helps Haley navigate this shocking revelation while taking control of the situation. That I wasn't there when Haley confronted her parents, but when she returned home, her eyes were red and puffy from crying. My father says it's all a misunderstanding, she said quietly, voice heavy with exhaustion. He says they're just trying to drive a wedge between us because you're insecure about your career. I simply nodded. I had expected this. Her parents were masters at twisting the narrative. What do you think? I asked gently. She didn't answer. Instead, she crawled into bed and turned away from me. I had tried to push back, to defend the truth, but somehow I had fallen even deeper into their trap. Suddenly, I was the villain in their story. They had managed to plant doubt in the one person whose opinion mattered most to me. For the next 2 weeks, Haley barely spoke to me. She went to her parents' house alone and returned with fresh tears, her trust in me shaken, even though I knew the truth. I threw myself into work, spending long hours in my studio, hoping the storm would pass. Then, a package arrived at my door. No return address, just my name scrawled across the top in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a simple note. You should see this. Vanessa Q, Owen's wife. Curious, I plugged in the drive. The files were video footage from the home security system at Gerald and Diane's house, time-stamped the night of the dinner. My heart raced as I watched. There was Diane, clearly adding something to a drink in the kitchen. There was me, entering and taking the glasses. And then Gerald, drinking from the tampered glass, unaware or pretending to be. But the footage didn't stop there. It continued after we had left. Diane was screaming at Gerald, blaming him for drinking from the wrong glass. Gerald yelled back, his voice tight with frustration. This isn't the first time you've done something like this. I watched the footage 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just confirmation of Diane's actions. It was a pattern, a history of manipulation. And Gerald wasn't innocent. He knew. He had known all along, and yet he had done nothing. My stomach twisted as the reality sank in. The family's carefully curated image, the polite smiles at dinner, the subtle manipulations over the years, it was all part of a pattern, a cruel system designed to control, intimidate, and gaslight. And now, I had the proof. The next file was even more chilling. It was recorded 2 days after the dinner. Diane and Gerald were in their living room, arguing about me. He knows what you did, Gerald said, his voice sharp with anger. So what? Diane replied coolly. It's his word against mine. Haley will never choose him over family. And if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised. Her words made my stomach tighten. She wasn't just angry about me. She was strategizing, manipulating, planning. Don't worry, Diane continued, her tone icy and calculated. I've already started talking to her about their marriage problems, planting seeds. By the time I'm done, she'll be filing for divorce and thinking it was her idea. I shut my laptop, hands trembling. This wasn't just about me. This was a systematic effort to control Haley's life, to isolate her from anyone who didn't fit their vision, and they had been doing it for years. Every subtle exclusion, every harmless comment, every hidden manipulation suddenly clicked into place. I called Vanessa immediately, my fingers shaking as I dialed. "Why did you send this to me?" I asked. "Because they did the same thing to me when I married Owen," she said quietly, her voice tinged with pain. "They tried to break us up for 2 years. Said I wasn't good enough. It almost worked. Why didn't you tell us?" I pressed, stunned by the scale of what she had survived. "Owen doesn't know," she admitted, her voice tight. "I couldn't risk him finding out. It would have destroyed him, and I wasn't strong enough to face them alone." I exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling over me. This wasn't just a family drama. This was a deliberate, long-term campaign of control and manipulation, and now I had the proof. Haley deserved to know, and together, we could finally put an end to it. Gerald's arrogance was impossible to ignore. "This is the first time we've dealt with someone like you. People who want to take advantage of our family," he laughed, a smug, superior tone in his voice. "Haley will come home where she belongs. She always does." He leaned back in his chair, smirking, and added, "Ask her about Thomas. Ask her about the fiancé before you." The words sent a chill down my spine. I felt the weight of his certainty pressing on me. I remembered Haley's previous engagement. Thomas, a kind and capable doctor, had seemed perfect for her. But Gerald and Diane had never approved. "His background wasn't good enough for her," Gerald continued, his grin self-satisfied. "It took us 6 months to convince her he was wrong for her. She broke it off and came home crying to Daddy. History repeats itself, son." The depth of their control and manipulation became horrifyingly clear. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about their words. I needed to understand the full pattern of their behavior. I called Haley's college roommate, Bethany, who had been close to her during that previous engagement. Her voice was heavy with disbelief as she explained, "Oh, God, that was awful. Thomas was perfect for her, but her parents, they convinced her he was cheating. They even planted evidence. He tried to tell her the truth, but by then she didn't trust him anymore." Hearing this, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just about me, or about one relationship they disapproved of. This was about complete control, a suffocating pattern of manipulation designed to isolate Haley and make her dependent on her parents' version of reality. They had done it before, and they had perfected their tactics over time. I didn't confront Haley right away. I knew I had to be careful, deliberate. Instead, I started collecting every piece of evidence I could find: emails, text messages, documents, anything that could prove their manipulation. Every detail mattered. This wasn't about revenge. It was about helping Haley see the truth for herself, reclaiming her autonomy, and ensuring that her parents' manipulative cycle could no longer continue. I reached out to Thomas first. At first, he was hesitant to talk, unsure why I was contacting him after all these years. But once I explained the situation, he opened up and sent me old emails between him and Haley, messages that clearly showed how her parents had systematically undermined their relationship. Reading through them, the picture became undeniable. Gerald and Diane had not just disapproved. They had actively interfered, planting doubts, creating false scenarios, and isolating Haley from anyone who might encourage her independence. I didn't stop with Thomas. I contacted other ex-boyfriends and old friends of Haley's, people who had mysteriously drifted away over time. One by one, a pattern emerged. Anyone who supported Haley's autonomy was gradually pushed out of her life, often in subtle, insidious ways. The scale of her parents' manipulation was staggering. Vanessa gave me even more confirmation. She provided additional security footage showing Diane and Gerald discussing their plans for Haley and me after they thought we might separate. In one clip, Gerald said, "Once they divorce, we'll convince her to move back home. She can run the foundation, meet suitable men." His words were calm, almost casual, but the intent was unmistakable. This was deliberate control, calculated over years. I compiled everything onto a single drive, organizing it meticulously. Then, without telling Haley, I invited Owen and Vanessa over for dinner. As dessert was being served, I connected my laptop to the TV. "There's something you both need to see," I said quietly, my voice steady. For the next hour, the truth unfolded on the screen. Emails, texts, and video footage exposing the full extent of the manipulation. Every smirk, every whispered plan, every calculated lie played out in front of them. By the end of it, the reality of Diane and Gerald's control was undeniable, and the gravity of what I was showing hit them hard. We watched the footage together in silence. Haley sat motionless, her face pale, eyes fixed on the screen as each clip unfolded. Owen kept shaking his head, muttering under his breath, "That's not my parents. That's not possible." When it was over, Haley turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Because I needed you to see it for yourself," I replied gently. "All of it. Not just what they did to me, but everything they've been doing to you your entire life." Owen stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. This is __. You've edited these videos. My parents wouldn't do this." Vanessa placed a calming hand on his arm. "Owen, they did the same thing to us," she said quietly. "Why do you think they suddenly started liking me after we had James? A grandchild gave them leverage." Owen's color drained from his face. You never told me," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I tried," Vanessa whispered. "You wouldn't listen." Later that night, Haley crawled into bed beside me, burying her head against my chest. "I need time to process this," she said softly. "But I believe you, and I'm sorry I doubted you." The next morning, Diane called Haley. She put her on speaker, her voice light and cheerful. "Darling, I was thinking you should come stay with us for a while. Your father and I are worried about your marriage. Sometimes separation can give clarity, you know?" Haley's voice was firm as she interrupted. "Mom, I've seen the videos." There was a pause on the line. "What videos?" Diane asked, trying to sound casual. "The security footage of you drugging Julian's drink? You and Dad plotting to break up my marriage." Haley's words cut through the air, unwavering. Another pause. "Haley, whatever he's shown you has been manipulated. You know Julian has always been jealous of our family," Diane tried, her voice trembling slightly. Haley's eyes met mine, fierce and determined. "Stop. We're coming over tonight, all of us. Owen, Vanessa, Julian, and me. We're going to talk about this as a family. No more lies." After she hung up, Haley turned to me, her voice tinged with frustration. "They'll deny everything. They'll try to twist it back on you." I nodded, calm and resolute. "I know. So what's our plan?" For the first time in weeks, I smiled. "I think it's time your parents met the real me." In this scene, Julian, Haley, Owen, and Vanessa confront Haley's parents, Gerald and Diane, at their home. Julian's approach is calm but deliberate. He's not just taking photos or recording for evidence. He's telling a story, exposing years of manipulation and control. Owen and Vanessa are present as support, witnessing the confrontation firsthand, which adds weight to the situation. Gerald starts off confident, assuming he can brush off any accusations as misunderstandings, while Diane tries to assert privacy over the family matters. Julian immediately challenges this, stating that the discussion is now part of the family archives because he, too, is family. This sets the tone. The power dynamic has shifted, and Gerald and Diane's control is being questioned. Over the next 2 hours, Julian methodically lays out the evidence. The poisoned drink, manipulation with past relationships, and interference in Haley and Owen's lives. Despite their repeated denials and attempts to gaslight him, Julian presents clips, emails, and documentation that steadily dismantle their defense. Their initial confidence fades, revealing guilt and fear. Haley finally asserts herself, making it clear that while she loves her parents, their actions are unacceptable and she refuses to let them control her life. Owen supports her, reinforcing that they are adults capable of making their own choices. Diane's tears reflect not remorse, but the loss of control she once held, while Gerald is left in disbelief. The scene ends with Julian handing Gerald a USB drive containing all the evidence, symbolizing the full exposure of their actions. This moment signifies a decisive shift. Truth and autonomy have replaced secrecy and manipulation, and Haley and Owen reclaim control over their own lives. The confrontation is cathartic, empowering, and sets the stage for lasting consequences for Diane and Gerald. This contains everything: the footage, the emails, the testimonies. "It's yours to keep," I said, handing Gerald the USB drive. He looked at me, suspicious, and asked, "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not going to ruin your reputation by sharing this with anyone else," I explained calmly. "That would hurt Haley, and I would never do that." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "But if you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever attempt to manipulate Haley or speak against me, copies will go to every member of your country club, your business partners, and your precious social circle." For the first time since I had met him, Gerald looked at me with something resembling respect. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "Yes," I said simply. 6 months passed. Haley and Owen began therapy to work through the damage their parents had caused, slowly rebuilding their confidence and trust. Diane and Gerald kept their distance, sending occasional texts, but respecting the boundaries we had firmly established. Then, over the holidays, we received an invitation from them. Haley wanted to go, she explained, wanting to see her parents and hoping they were genuinely trying. I agreed, but I wasn't naive enough to believe they had suddenly changed overnight. When we arrived, everything seemed normal at first. Diane had prepared a lavish feast, and Gerald was charming, asking questions about my latest photography projects with a sincerity that appeared genuine. After dinner, Gerald pulled me aside and invited me into his study. "I have a proposition for you," he said, pouring a glass of scotch and offering it to me. "I've been thinking about your career. Photography has been good to you, but have you considered diversifying? I could bring you into my firm on a junior partner track. The salary would be substantial." I took the glass in my hand, but didn't drink. "Why would you do that?" I asked. He smiled smoothly. "Because I respect how you handled everything. You protected my daughter while standing your ground. That's what a real man does." I set the glass down, untouched. "I appreciate that," I replied evenly, letting him see that respect alone wasn't enough to erase the past. But it was a step toward a more cautious truce that I refused the offer. But Gerald's smile tightened. "Julian, be reasonable," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "This is an olive branch, a way for us to move forward." "No," I repeated, my tone resolute. "It's another attempt to control. You can't buy me, Gerald. And you can't stand the fact that Haley loves me exactly as I am." His facade dropped, and his voice hissed. "Everyone has a price." I stood up, feeling the fire of conviction surge through me. "That's where you're wrong," I said steadily. "And that's why you'll never understand your daughter." With that, I walked back to the dining room where Diane was flipping through old photo albums with Haley. "Look at these," Diane said brightly, showing pictures from Haley's childhood. "You were so happy when you lived at home." Haley caught my eye across the room, and I gave a slight nod. She understood immediately that something significant had happened. Rising from her chair, she faced her parents with a newfound determination. "Mom, Dad," she announced, her voice clear and steady, commanding attention. "I have something to tell you. Julian and we're having a baby. I'm 3 months pregnant." The shock on their faces was genuine. Diane recovered first, rushing forward to embrace her daughter, tears shining in her eyes. Gerald approached more slowly, glancing between Haley and me, his congratulations stiff but measured. "Thank you," I replied when he spoke, then leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so that only he could hear. "This child will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that." His expression hardened at first, but then he nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that he understood the warning. As we drove home that night, Haley squeezed my hand gently. "They'll never change, will they?" she asked softly. "No," I admitted honestly, "but they'll have to accept that we do." 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Gerald's attorney. Inside was a deed to a house, our house. It was a gesture that spoke louder than words, a tentative step toward acknowledgement, a recognition of our family and the life we were building together on our own terms we had been renting for years. And the certified letter included not only the deed to our home, but also legal documents establishing a trust fund for our unborn child. There was no note, no conditions, no strings attached, just a clean, irrevocable transfer of assets. It wasn't an apology. Gerald wasn't capable of that. But it was an acknowledgement, the only one he could give, that we had one. Our daughter was born in the summer, and we named her Eliza after my grandmother. When Diane and Gerald came to the hospital, they brought gifts but kept a respectful distance. They cooed over the baby, took a few photos, and left without offering unsolicited parenting advice or lectures about finances. Months passed, and our relationship with them settled into something that resembled normalcy. They never apologized for what they had done, but they stopped trying to control Haley's life or undermine my career. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And for the first time, our family could breathe. One evening, as I was editing photos in my studio, Haley came in carrying Eliza. "My mother called," she said. "She wants us to come for Christmas." I looked up from my computer. "What do you want to do?" "I think we should go," she replied, though she added conditions. "We stay at a hotel, not their house. We leave when we want, and there's no unsupervised time with Eliza." I nodded. "Sounds reasonable." She sat down beside me, gently bouncing our daughter. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think success meant making my parents happy, getting their approval, meeting their expectations." She looked down at Eliza, then back at me, a small, knowing smile on her face. Now, I realize it means something completely different. I knew now that success wasn't about meeting someone else's expectations or winning approval. It was about making choices I could be proud of and standing by the people I loved. 2 weeks before Christmas, a large envelope arrived from Gerald. Inside was a glossy brochure for his company's annual report. To my surprise, my photographs were featured throughout: sweeping landscapes, intimate portraits, and architectural shots. The work I had created on my own terms, free from his interference. Tucked inside was a brief note: "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy." It wasn't an act of forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't even a gesture of gratitude. It was something quieter, stronger, respect perhaps. An acknowledgement that I had succeeded on my own terms, not because of him or his influence. I didn't call to thank him. There was no need. We both understood that this wasn't about appreciation. It was about recognizing the new boundaries, the new reality we had created. That spring, I took the next step in my life and career. I opened my own gallery in downtown Nashville. The grand opening was a culmination of years of hard work, dedication, and the quiet defiance that had brought me this far. Haley stood beside me, her hand in mine, beaming with pride. Eliza giggled in her stroller as friends, family, and supporters wandered through the gallery, marveling at the photographs displayed on the walls. For the first time, I felt the true weight of accomplishment, not because someone else had approved of it, but because I had built it from scratch, guided by my own vision, my own choices, and the people who mattered most. It was more than a gallery opening. It was a statement, a life reclaimed, a family strengthened, and the knowledge that at last we were free to define our own story. Me, Eliza on my hip, my parents flown in from Oregon, and friends and clients filling the gallery, admiring the images I had captured over the years. It was a night of quiet triumph. Gerald and Diane arrived toward the end of the evening. They didn't stay long. Diane held Eliza briefly, Haley watching every move, protective but calm. Gerald shook my hand, nodded at the photographs with genuine approval, and left without offering a single suggestion about how I should run my business. As we locked up that night, Haley asked softly, "Do you think they've changed?" I considered her question carefully. "No," I said finally, "but they've accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes that's enough." Later, sitting on our porch and watching the stars emerge over the mountains, Eliza asleep in her crib upstairs, I realized something I hadn't fully articulated before. I hadn't won by playing Gerald and Diane's game. I had won by refusing to play at all. I had stood my ground, protected what mattered, and built my life according to my own definition of success. Not with schemes or manipulation, but with honesty, persistence, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own worth. In the end, that was the most satisfying revenge of all, living well on my own terms with the family I love by my side. And as I watched Haley smile at me across the porch, I knew that the life we had built together was untouchable, resilient, and ours, completely ours.